Hello and welcome to the final session of today's forum. My name is Bala and we met this morning. I'm the director at Trobe Art Institute. It's wonderful to see such a full group here at this point in the day. And we have four wonderful panellists today who I've only just met, all of them. And I can tell you that they're open and generous and committed to their work and will welcome your questions at the conclusion of this session. But first we have a series of question and answer. But before we do that, I'm going to actually introduce them, which would be very courteous of me. To my left is Lorraine Little, Northwest Partnership Manager for Regional Arts Victoria and an experienced arts manager with a strong regional community arts development focus. And actually we have a regional person, we have a local government person, we have a state government person, and we have a national government person. So, well, so to speak, government. So it's really a wonderful array of talent this afternoon. Next to Lorraine, we have Rohan Phillips, Arts Officer with the City of Greater Bendigo. And then to Rohan's left, we have Kavanagh, Manager Arts Development for Creative Victoria. And then to the left of Caitlin, we have Holly Morrison, who works for Nava, the National Association for the Visual Arts. Welcome. What I thought I would do first of all, as I said, I really wanted to sort of cut to the chase with this session. And, you know, there are a lot of changes that have occurred in the government funding and other funding arena over the last few years. And everything in a way has been streamlined, hasn't it, in terms of how information is sourced, where to find it, and often the same portals are used across various grant bodies, for example. And I wondered if we could start simply by each of you describing how individuals find information about the grants that you provide, and also whether you have regular grant rounds and you also accept sort of ad hoc applications during the year.
Hi folks, Lorraine from Regional Arts Victoria. As mentioned, I'm actually based further up the road in the Swan Hill, Mildura, Oyen, northwest of the state. Regional Arts Victoria is not a government body and it's not officially a funding body. We're a member-based organisation, not-for-profit, blah, 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 blah. But we do deliver funding programs on behalf of sometimes the federal government, which we have done for 20 years, and that's called the Regional Arts Fund. And then occasionally, particularly through the COVID years, we delivered a lot of funding on behalf of state government. But we are not a funding body or a government body. So currently, it's the Regional Arts Fund that we deliver on behalf of federal government. Federal government sets the guidelines. Our role in that process is to give advice to potential funding applicants. So that's all I'll say right now. No, last part of your question. The Regional Arts Fund is a national program, so every state has a version of it, subject to common federal guidelines. There are two streams within it. One is project grants. They're offered twice a year. And the other one is a quick response grant, which are offered on a monthly basis for 10 months of the year. A much smaller pool of money, but it is not just simply a small project fund. There's very, very specific criteria that make something a quick response grant, but we can talk about that later.
Thank you. Rohan Phillips, City of Greater Bendigo, and I guess part of the City of Greater Bendigo, a very large organisation with a lot of aims, sort of roads, rates and rubbish, and the arts sit in there as well. I'm going to talk about some of the programs. I administer directly a few programs like the Artists on View subsidy program. We have other exhibition programs, and every now and then we'll put out an EOI for art projects, which is, I guess, it's sort of in the grant territory. More broadly, the city does have a community grants program, which covers the whole of the community. It's got some barriers there, particularly for arts projects, but it's not inaccessible. It doesn't exclude art projects. And they have a whole range of tiers, sort of 50,000 down to, I think, 20,000, 10, and then $5,000. And the 5,000 is sort of like a quick response there, fast turnaround, open all the time. As the money gets larger, the cycles become longer. And as I say, we can talk about those. How do you hear about our projects? Probably our Artsy Bulletin. For those, it comes out fortnightly, and it's really anything that hits our desk. Whether it is funding's a nice carrot for people to open the e-bulletin, but it also has exhibitions, programs like this. As I say, anything that we hear about that we think's relevant to our community. We also have a Facebook page. It's a fluid space, and so I guess that's the challenge, and particularly with local government, which doesn't necessarily have fluid in its DNA. That's one of the challenges we've got, is how do we get stuff out. I'll just say very quickly that there's a brand new funding that opened just a few days ago. It's called Create Lab. This is one that comes from the creative industries part of council. That application's closed 19th of June, but that's a $4,000 grant for work in the Hargraves Mell. So things like that come up, and that's where a Facebook. So we'd ask you to sort of get on Facebook, follow creative communities. I'll just say very quickly, with the Artsy Bulletin, we tend not to do the RAV, the Creative Vic, the other grants, on the because there's so much stuff out there, and how do we keep on top of it? If your practice is at the stage of Creative Vic, Osco, hopefully part of your practice means subscribing to their bulletins and so forth, and being across that information. Not to say that we don't want to support you applying for Creative Vic and Osco, but yeah, just it's a way of managing information.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. I'm from Creative Victoria, so it's obviously a state funding body. I work in the arts development team. So in our team, we are focused on delivering programs really aimed at the independent arts sector. So we have a range of programs that we run, and there's a few like legacy programs that you might have heard of, like Vic Arts, that no longer run. They've changed since COVID. This year we've run a program called Creators Fund, which offers up to $50,000 to all art forms, and it's about expanding your arts practice. It's about giving yourself time to really explore and experiment with your practice. We also just opened 2 days ago a program called Creative Ventures Program. So that is for collectives and micro-organisations. It offers 2 years of funding, from $70,000 to $100,000 per year. And that's for a range, like a suite of programming, that's for marketing and audience engagement, exporting ideas. We are really hoping to very soon have up our calendar for the next 18 months with our upcoming programs. So obviously we know it's super important for you to all be able to plan ahead. So in the second half of the year, we will announce more programs. One will be projects-based funding, and another will be on contemporary music. And then again, next year, we will offer a similar suite of programs. But yeah, we do suggest signing up to our e-news, calling up our staff. We have a team that's always there to answer questions. The best thing to do is to go to the website and read the guidelines. That's where you'll find guidelines.
Did you say guidelines?
I did. It's a hot tip. Check them out. But yes, obviously we really know it's important to get our programs up as soon as possible so you can all really start planning ahead. So we're hoping that's going to be any minute now.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly, National Association for the Visual Arts, also known as Nava. We've had a very fluctuating grant program over the last few years. We have had federal and state funding come through us to hand out to artists, but at the moment our program is solely funded by philanthropists. So we have grants that kind of will come and go as philanthropists give money. the money runs out, we get another program. Two of the programs that we have at the moment, one is the Carstairs Prize and one is the Windmill Trust Scholarship. Unfortunately, Windmill Trust Scholarship is New South Wales only, so not as helpful to you guys unless you live in regional New South Wales. But the Carstairs Prize is open towards the end of the year. Our programs usually close towards the end of the year so that the money is ready for you to use in the next calendar year. We also have a program that we started up kind of right before COVID, was the Artist Benevolent Fund, which is, again, philanthropist funded, which is actually for artists in crisis. So if something terrible happens to your studio, something terrible happens to you, and it impacts your ability to make money through your practice, that fund is there to support artists through that. In terms of finding info and things like that about it, you just head to our website and you'll see a little button for our Nava grants. You'll see all the terms and conditions for each grant there. Again, have a look at them, see whether it fits with what you do. And we're always there to help people with their funding applications. We, as a membership organisation, help our members out a lot with other grants that they're applying for, whether it would be OSCO, state government, or something else, can help with like giving info about how to do your grant budget, how to prepare your support material, all that kind of thing. So our support kind of goes both ways.
Thank you. Interesting to note there that there's almost a kind of hierarchy that a couple of you have referred to. For example, we are dealing with this stage of artist, we are dealing with this. And I just wondered, given the audience here, and we are priming you for success, that's the purpose of today, generally speaking, emerging artists, would you, first of all, comment on whether you do frame a certain section of your grant opportunities or your opportunities for support in that way, almost hierarchically in terms of career point of development, and also if there were one of those options that you would really recommend to today's audience in particular? Anyone?
My initial response to that question would be no. However, I think this is true of any of the funding programs that we have delivered in the past and currently, is the assessors will look to see at where you are at in your career, and I'm now talking generic arts, not visual arts, because I don't come from a visual arts background per se. So it's about, they will look at where are you at currently, what have you or haven't you done before, what are you pitching to do in the context of this funded proposal or project, and will that proposal expand and develop your practice? But secondly, are you capable, based on the evidence that you provide them, do they have confidence that you are capable of delivering against that next step in your practice?
I think a lot of our programs, and we've got images, I think, yes, of Artist on View, so that certainly is I'd consider it's an entry-level grant. It's mainly a space subsidy. There is $1,000 funding, which isn't a huge amount. Having said that, one of our goals in that program, and I think that what you were saying about sort of looking at, is this the funding the right fit for the artist, for the project? That's really important. I think comes down to when, and it might be something we sort of dig into later, when you are applying for your project, this is what I want to do. Is that funding over there? How much am I willing to tweak my program, massage it, because that's the only funding that I can possibly get? I think that's something to consider. What was I saying about? And just one of the basic things with Artists on View, because we're thinking it's possibly my first grad arts application, is we still try and tailor the process. We're asking essentially the same questions that you'll be asked whether you apply for RAV right up to Australia Council. There's a pretty standard set of questions that funders will want to know, and so probably the only thing we don't do, although that now we're giving you cash to go with that, we do have some budget questions, but generally we don't ask for a sort of fully costed program for $1,000. We don't want to know we're going to get 3 bottles of red wine and 2 bottles of white wine or something like that. We're trying to make, and accessibility is really important, and so constantly looking, are our questions clear? Are we asking questions we need to ask? Yeah, that's probably what I want to say about that.
I wouldn't say any of our programs are focused specifically on emerging artists, but we certainly look at our suite of programs and the pathways through every stage for artists to see that we've got coverage for everyone there. I would say something like Creative Projects Fund is more aimed at emerging artists. It's there for you to get your projects up and happening. Whereas Creators Fund might be, you've had some years of practice and now you want to explore something new. That's not to say that you can't get that fund as an emerging artist, but it's probably more for that mid-career stage artist. Something like Creative Ventures is, the micro organisations and collectives. But, we have run different programs that have now shifted for COVID that were quite recovery focused. And now we're going back to look at the entire landscape and to ensure there are coverage for all artists across every stage. So that's what we're aiming for.
Quite a few of our grant programs are categorised by career stage. That generally has been a request of the funder. So for instance, we've had the Freedman Foundation Travelling Scholarship, which is specifically for emerging artists. That one kind of got put to sleep a little bit during COVID because it involved overseas travel, but we're hoping to re-establish that so that we can continue to offer that grant in some form. As an organisation generally, we've found it a bit difficult to try and put people into categories of emerging artists, mid-career artists, established artists, just because careers do fluctuate, people stop to have children, other jobs, that kind of thing, so it hasn't been particularly helpful to do that. But when we do have funding programs, we try and make them as broad as possible to suit people at whatever career stage they are at. They're generally things like presenting an exhibition, developing new work, maybe doing a residency, things that will happen at different career stages of an artist. And as mentioned before, assessors will look at where you are at in your stage and kind of base the type of project that you're putting forward based on your career stage. Oh, that's a really good opportunity for that person because they've never done a solo exhibition before, or they've never exhibited in a group exhibition before, or they've never exhibited at a gallery of this calibre before. So that's really important that they have this support to get to that point, is kind of our goal with a lot of our programs.
Thank you. I hope you did, but I found that extremely helpful and generous. Thank you. I have a question before we get into the nitty-gritty of what makes a successful grant application. There'll be very specific questions there I'm sure this panel will respond to. I find one of the most important aspects in grant writing is actually imagining the assessor, the volume of reading, the impact literally of hours and hours of reading words and words and words. And I just wondered if we could for a moment begin to empathise through the stories of these 4 people, what does an assessment process look like for whom? And yeah, just to describe a little bit what it is like to be on the assessment panel for one of these opportunities. We might start at the other end.
So in my time at Nava, I have been at many different stages of the assessment process. I've been the person answering the phone calls, getting the applications in, going through all the applications and getting them ready for the assessor and taking them into the assessment meeting with the assessors. We've always used external assessors, so peers, colleagues are the ones assessing the application. We've had anything from 40 applications to 178 applications in one round. I'm close. So you can imagine for someone like a fellow artist, a fellow curator, trying to go through that many applications and seeing the work out there and they're going, wow, this person's really amazing and doing this, or they might be reading something and going, oh, I don't quite understand what this person is wanting to do. I'm not even quite sure what their practice is. And it can be really challenging, particularly if they're only able to accept one person. Because if you've got 60, 70 applications and you can only pick one, that's a fairly small success rate. So there is a lot of reading through the application, looking at the support material. Some assessors go straight to the support material and then read the application. And then there's a meeting where the assessors will go back and forth on what they agree with, what they don't agree with. Different assessors can have very different opinions as to what makes an application. But having a very clear idea of someone's project quite quickly is important, because otherwise they'll be reading through your application trying to find what is it that you're doing. So if they can read the initial sentence and be like, oh yeah, cool, I get it, and then continue on and it builds the picture in their head, that I think can make an application stand out to an assessor because they can see what you see. Yeah.
So at Creative Vic, our assessment process, all the assessment is done through external peer assessment. So we aren't involved in any of that. So we do put together the panel of peers. We do have a register on our website, and as artists, you can sign up and put your name down to be part of that process. We also get previous recipients to be on the panels. We get artists across different organisations to be involved. We do receive a lot of applications in terms of the success rate. It's not fabulous. Last program we got over 500 applications, and we split the peers into art forms, and so they will assess their art form. Some of them will be up to 50 to 60 applications, and this is pages of information. So as you said, being very succinct in your application is beneficial for the peers, so they can really get your idea quickly. The other thing we do tell them in the assessment process is to look at the assessment criteria, and that's how we guide them to assess. It's based on the aims and objectives of the program and the criteria. So that's what the panel are looking at when they assess.
Thank you. Speaking of getting on a panel, a number of years ago, I also was fortunate to be on a Creative Vic assessment panel, and it was a real eye-opener, having sort of sent my applications off and got the thank you. The standard of applications was very high, unfortunately. You think, what do they know? They just did it on a weekend or a whim. It was a real eye-opener, and yes, I reckon if you could get onto a panel, I'd register. It really is a great process. It's a tough process, and when you get that thanks, your application was really good, but that's hard. But trust that the people who made that decision did it with a really best intention, talking about meeting the criteria. Look on the application. What are they asking for? How does your project meet that criteria? The other one, I learned so much doing the panel. One thing I did learn about was word counts, and when you've got, I'm not sure if people are young enough to remember phone books, but when you've got like 2 phone books worth of applications and it's 2 a.m, and I remember at 2 a.m. counting, that's meant to be 50 words. That's 53 words. What are you doing this to me? Keep it clear. Also that thing of what am I seeing? Creative experience, but even locally, you get an application and like, yes, there's some great ideas here, but when I walk into the space, I don't know what I'm seeing. Am I seeing sculptures? Am I seeing art on the wall? Am I seeing dance? That's a big challenge. The other thing I want to say in terms of the applications was all the questions, the budget's just as important, and sort of talking about different people on the panel will look for different things. Some people will go to the budget, and there are people, and I know when I start an art project, I'll often sort of, well, what's my budget? Where am I spending the money? And so I think it's a myth that artists aren't very good at numbers. A good budget will sell your project just as well as a good 50-word descriptor. Don't think of the budget as an afterthought that no one really, it's only when the the boring people get to your application, that they care about the budget. A good budget will sell your project. The other thing that I was going to say about our projects.
Can I interrupt you there, Rohan? I think that's a really key point. May I ask, you to unpack that a little bit? So, for example, how does a budget mirror the intentions of a project in the simplest sense?
Look, in the very simplest sense, like you do read a lot of information about a project, and it's sort of, some of it goes in, some of it doesn't. You get to the budget and you see, for example, a project that we supported last year, we've got money allocated to a childcare worker because we appreciate, that's right, this project is focused on young families, and they've thought that in order for mum and dad to create this art, someone's going to have to look after the kids. Or it could be framing costs. Okay, so this work is going to be framed, like the two sort of basic artist fees, all that sort of stuff. The only other thing I wanted to add, is that enough for budgets, or we might explore it later, or did anyone else want to talk about budgets at this stage?
You can keep going, I might have a question for Lorraine on that too.
The only thing I was going to add, and I've had to write notes, talking about the assessment, even so for some of the city ones where it's small, sort of up to 5,000, they're generally assessed internally. But even in that process, certainly the ones I'm involved with, as arts officer, I'm not one of the assessors. So I think it's really important to know that the person who you should be talking to when you're putting your application in, as if you talk to me, because I'm not assessing it, I feel that gives me a great deal of freedom to give you, there's no conflict of interest. I can say, and then hand it into the room with the assessors, and they take over. So, as I say, it's a tough process, and it's not ideal, but I think it's the best we've got.
Now, because Rose is in the audience and she likes stats, we were speaking at lunchtime. I'm going to give some stats here. And this is not to put you off, it's just to give you perspective. This is for the most recent quick response round in April for the federal funding. Quick response grants up to $3,000 for an individual, up to $5,000 for an organisation or group. There is about $8,000 to $10,000 per month allocated for that program in our state. So we had 22 applications. Now, this is a really fascinating and insightful stat. Of those 22, 17 were eligible. So that means 5 applications didn't even get it past the first hurdle because they were ineligible. 2 of them had applied who were Melbourne-based people. They're not eligible. They ticked that they read the guidelines, though. Okay, so of those 17 that were eligible, 8 of them were put into the competitive pile by the assessors, against the criteria, against the priorities, against all of those things. And of those 8, 3 got funded. Our job, all of us as artists or as the people on the end of a phone giving advice, is to do our very best to get you into the competitive pile. And beyond that, it is beyond our control to influence. There's a whole range of other factors. Demographics, geographics, art form, blah, blah, blah. So, when I'm on the phone talking to artists and applicants, I tell them 3 things. Or 3 things are of equal importance in a funding application. The first thing is the thing that most applicants spend 90% of the time on, the idea. Answering all those questions about what you want to do, who you want to do it with, etc., etc. Highly recommend you get into the practice, again, from looking after your assessors from that perspective, 1 or 2 sentences, dot point, dot point, dot point, dot point. Make it easy for them. And dot points make us more succinct in our articulation. Because again, we're all caught up in the idea. And so words and sentences and paragraphs and get someone else to read it who's not from your art practice. Do they understand what the hell you're talking about? Your best friend might, but does someone who's not from your art form know what you're talking about? Don't use jargon. Don't assume they know you. Don't assume they know your art practice or your art form. So that's that first section. Second section, which is equally important to the idea, is your budget and your timelines. Are they realistic? Do they match up to what you've articulated in that first section? And the third section is as equally important, is your support material. Is it relevant to what you say you are wanting to do? Support letters are not fan letters. Support letters aren't, we really like this artist or this group and we think they should be funded. No, waste of paper, waste of space. Support letter is specific to your funding application. Who have you said in your body of your application you are wanting or planning to work with? Oh, we think we're going to want to work with young people. Assessors go to the support material. Where's there a letter from Youth Inc. or blah, blah, blah school group saying, yes, we've spoken with that group and we'd love to work with them and we're committed to doing that in term 2 for once a week, da-da-da-da. Specifics that back up that fantastic idea in section 1 is more than that. It's more than a fantastic idea. It's actuality. So the part 2, budget and timeline. Part 3, support material, is the evidence that the assessors will go to once they like the idea of what you want to do. So many proposals do not get funded because the good idea is let down by part 2 and part 3. And that's what makes those, you get into that pile of 8, and then it's those little other factors that will get you not being one of the 3. Frank and fearless advice, come to me.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, panel. May I ask you a question that might be a little bit challenging, but without obviously naming names, can you imagine or remember a recent application that really stood out for you? You may not have been the assessor, but what was it that really set this apart? Because when it comes to words and ideas, they're almost a dime a dozen. The art world today is enormous. It's voluminous. Language itself is challenging, repetitive, arduous to read in volume, as we've just heard. What is it, that is really set apart? If you can just imagine and help us imagine, what was that great thing that took your attention and you thought, this is great? Perhaps whether or not in the end it was funded. Does anybody have a response to that? Great, thank you.
So this is not a recent one. This one is an older one. Ramesh Mario Nithyendran, he applied for our Friedman Foundation Scholarship many a eon ago when he was still emerging. But we have actually paid him to provide an example grant application because his grant applications are so great. Very eloquent writer, but you can explain his ideas in written form particularly well. But also, his support material is beautiful. It's well presented, the images are great. You can see his work and you can see the description and his work kind of come together. He has learnt how to do a budget. His budget adds up. That's one of the things when you're looking at a budget, you get to the bottom, it's like, ooh, those numbers don't match. But it's the kind of thing where he can also see that he is prepared to apply for grants. He has material already put together that's to go into grants. He has his material already ready so that when you get that 2-month, sometimes even 1-month deadline, you're not scrambling to try and get something that hasn't been thought through into the grant application form, because forms can be very similar, very different, but there are things that you can pre-prepare, like your CV, like your support material, like a pitch, a 30-second pitch of what your project is. So yeah, it's kind of you reading through, like you can do it from top to bottom, back to front. You can see what the goal is and how you're going to get there through the backup of, if it's your support letters, your viable budget, you've already got projects that you might have done of a similar nature, and that all comes together to be like, hey, I've got this really cool thing and you want to be part of it by giving me the money. Yeah. Anyone else got one?
I have one of, I can't say who they are, because they don't know yet, so that's exciting for them. But we are all on the phone, so we are talking to people every day, and a lot of it is people almost arguing to fit their idea into our program, and it's not the right program. And I understand when there's not many grants out there, you're just trying to have a crack at everything. But unfortunately, if, Creators Fund is really focused on that research and experimentation, development and practice. So if you've got a project and you're wedging it into that program and saying, but you're just going to do a bit of development on it, it's still not fitting within the essence of that program. So when I'm on the phone and I'm having those conversations all day, and then you speak to someone who really is listening to what the program's about, their idea will come through super clearly, and that they've really read the guidelines, that they've also really able to articulate how it's going to speak to the program. So I know, being on the phone, I'm usually on the screen art form and speaking to a documentary filmmaker who was expanding their creative practice and looking into exploring gender in Africa, but they were very clear on how that was fit into their practice. They were talking through their budget, they had the support material, they had letters of support and confirmation that really backed up that this wasn't just an idea. Yeah. So when I was like, I've got a good vibe about these people. And then they rated really, I think, top of the screen. It's very clear when people get the program, and it's not like it's a trick or anything. It's not even really them telling me their idea, it's just how well they're talking to the aims of that program.
I think that authenticity is really important. So if you can't fake authenticity, get another gig or something. Careful, because I sort of can't say who, but I recently had an application from a young person, and it was really rough, but the language was just really exciting, and the way that young person told their story, it really got you in. One of the things I think you need to remember when you're writing that application is the assessment. When it goes to a peer assessment, these are artistic people. For better or worse, you're getting arty people reading your applications. And again, without sort of stereotyping, arty people tend to have imaginations. So if you can engage that imagination, and it's tricky because we don't want to waffle, but if you could, sometimes people say, think of the subsidy program. For a while there it was, well, here are artworks that I've created in the last, or I haven't exhibited for 5 years, so I thought it's my time to exhibit. That's not going to get you through a competitive process. If you've got someone who's got a passion and can tell that story, then you've got a much better chance. I mean, again, for Artists on View, we have curators from the Bendigo Art Gallery, part of the assessment panel. My background's in music. I'm not a vis artist. I'm a really good drawer, but no one knows that. But to sit in there with curators, and they start curating the show, a really good application. They're just about from the support material, and you can see them imagining the show. And then the great thing is you get buy-in. And thinking of my time on one of the Creative Vic panels, something that stuck with me, it's a long days of assessment. We got through the morning when we got through each application, and one of the panellists had to leave, and that was when we made the final decision. And that panellist went to the chair and said, I like that one, I like that one, I like that one. That one's the one I'm lying in front of the bus for. And I thought, yeah, that's what you want. And every time I'm in a panel, it's sort of the question, and I had an assessment for Raw Arts yesterday, and sort of, okay, we've got 20 applications. Is there one here that you're going to lie in front of the bus for? And that, as I say, that's something that's really resonated with me.
Strangely enough, I have nothing to add to those comments.
May I ask a question about language? Because I think, this is a hugely challenging question. Holly, you raised the point about Mario's, wonderful language, and often it's very difficult. There's just so much a lot of applications, for example, appear to be touching every urgent issue that we have in, for example, contemporary visual arts today, and feeling as though that is the way to target the grant, and yet it appears to be almost generic at the end of the day. What is the recommendation you might make? What sort of techniques can emerging artists particularly, but artists in general, undertake to pursue a compelling written application? Even though, of course, as Lorraine's pointed out, that's only one component. What does it take to write succinctly, in plain language, a compelling application?
Well, as I said before, I'm a bit of a fan of the one or two sentences followed up by dot points. It really does make you succinct. I think also it is about, I've lost my train of thought. Oh, sorry, I'm going to hand over. I've really lost it.
I'll pick up on one of the things Lorraine said earlier, and that was about getting someone else to read it.
I was going to say thank you. Thank you.
My background's classical music, writing program notes and stuff like that. Who's my audience? My audience is my father, who has no music background at all. He's not a dummy, so he can cope with concepts, but he doesn't like. But I'm not going to say the Allegro Appassionato, you can see modulates into C minor here. He doesn't need to know that, and that's not telling the story. Again, one of my list of Creative Vic assessment panels, one of the panels I was on, and this is what not to do, included a lot of art forms. And it was my first panel, and I was this kid from the country. I was probably 40 or something, but I was this kid from the country and very nervous, and I'd read all these applications, and there were two dance ones that I just didn't understand. And I went down to the big smoke and sort of tried not to, wow, look at those buildings. And I was in the room, and we talked about the lit applications and the visual arts ones, and the dance ones got closer, and I was sort of under my chair a bit. Don't ask me about the dance ones. And the dance ones came up, and they went, and in the panel, they had dance experts. I said, what do you think about application 23? He goes, I've got no idea. And this is the dance expert who didn't understand the jargon. There was so much jargon, it was a mess. And I thought, oh, good, I'm not dumb perhaps. Maybe I am, but that's the big lesson. And I think particularly people coming directly out of university, when you've spent 4, 6, 9 years using all the big words, and the big words are great, and you can drop the big words in any conversation. Be careful of the big words, unless you really know what you're talking about or saying it clearly. Avoid the big words.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think we really want to make our programs open to everyone. So we don't want it to be that you have to be this amazing writer to get have a successful outcome with a grant application. You don't need it to be an academic writer. And I think often when you do write in that manner, your idea can become unclear. As I said before, so one person might be looking through 50 to 60 applications. They have a short amount of time. If they're trying to understand all your references and they're lost. I did just look at one of my notes that was from the recent comments from Creators Fund. Someone said, too jargon heavy, and so the idea doesn't come through. Often with something like Creators Fund, because it's about exploring, experimenting, people get a little lofty and then they lose focus of like, but what are you doing? And so it's really, you don't need to write in the most flowery, amazing, verbose language. It's just about being clear.
I think we've all had very similar experiences because I had that in my notes as well, as get someone else to read it, particularly someone who preferably doesn't work in the arts. And again, I've seen assessors put a note next to something going too jargon heavy, just they couldn't wade their way through it. And I did ask our deputy director, who currently looks after our grant program, what her suggestion was. The other one was, if you are writing something, give yourself time to walk away and come back to it. You'll have fresh eyes, it'll be a different day, you've had your shower thought, all that kind of thing. And the other general advice that we've given over the years is your elevator pitch, your 30-second pitch, your 3-minute pitch. having that as verbal, written, it's either a pitch of your project or your practice or a combination of both, that kind of thing. But yeah, it is a practice, like practicing applying for grants is also a thing. Like you might surprise yourself and get the money, but a lot of people do practice writing grants and submitting them and not thinking that they're going to get them. And sometimes you're like, wow, actually I did. But starting off the smaller ones as well, like we've mentioned, they can ask a lot less intense questions so that you're starting off with a lot simpler questions, and that way you can practice your writing, practice explaining your work, practice explaining your ideas in that format. But another thing is also accessibility. Like there are people for whom writing is not accessible for them, and asking for accommodation in that is also a possibility.
I'll just add to that. Yes, good point. We had our first ever Auslan application recently, so always call up in regards to if you need to submit your application in a different format. We are totally happy to accommodate that. So sometimes we get video responses, we get an array of different responses, so always ask. You don't have to go down that one path.
I'm very conscious of the time and your possibly, hopefully, burning desire to ask questions of this panel. Does anybody have any questions at this point? We just have about just over 5 minutes. Yes.
Thanks. Not a question, but in addition to that, if anyone needs any support with applying for grants or even identifying opportunities and you have any disabilities whatsoever, there is actually an organisation in Victoria that specialises in providing that support to artists. The name escapes me right now. Is it Access Victoria, perhaps? Arts Access. It's Arts Access. So check them out. They've got staff whose job it is to actually be available to have a chat, to explore what support's available for artists who need to, get some support in applying for those opportunities. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more? Yes.
I was just wondering, is there a couple of questions, sorry. Is there any time you should wait before reapplying if you're unsuccessful? Is it the amount of times you apply considered?
Slightly off-centre to your question, however, what I would say is avoid cutting and pasting. Yep. So I applied for that fund, for that program. Oh, here's this other grant program. I haven't got time. I'll just cut and paste that old application into this new one. So that's kind of in response. Secondly, something like the quick response grant, yes, you can apply. If you were unsuccessful in April, you can apply again in May. However, again, if you haven't worked on your application or tweaked it or refined it or evolved it, and it wasn't successful the first time, it's probably not going to be successful the second time.
I just add to that, we don't have restrictions either. You can apply multiple times. Perhaps call us up and we will book in a time for feedback so that you can, and it's usually can point to something like, well, the support material wasn't as strong, so that maybe I'll focus on that this time.
And just generally, they will outline in guidelines if it is a grant that once you've got it once, you can't get it again. Others will be like, you have to wait 6 months, you have to wait a year. But generally, if you have applied and not been successful, most of the time you're eligible in the next round.
Thank you. The other question was back to budgets, and if you could explain a little bit about in-kind.
For example, and I use this a lot when I'm talking to people, I often talking to people in very small community, rural and remote, not regional. So it might be that the local scout hall is available for that group to go in and do rehearsals. Now maybe that scout hall or a council venue at a commercial rate would be $500 or $1,000 a week, but you negotiate with that organisation to only pay half that amount in cash. So instead of being $1,000 cash, you actually pay $500, but therefore it represents $500 in-kind donation to the project.
And there are, for example, if you've got volunteers, you could do volunteers. One of the things I've seen where grads' budgets get out of whack is you need to make sure that that in-kind is in both columns. So if you're getting the $500 equivalent for the Scout Hall, you put Scout Hall hire as a cost of $500 and as your costs, and then in your income, you have that $500 in kind. Yeah.
As an artist approaching one of your grant funds, how would you recommend really the approach of coming as an open slate, actually using the grant guidelines and criteria as a basis from which to build a project, rather than coming with, I've got all of this stuff I want to fit in, I'm bringing in a pink dog, but you're funding orange dogs, I'm going to make my dog orange.
I think that's a good question. The dogs I can picture. A good grad process and a good grad application is actually a really good way. I think it's often a good grad form will ask you the questions that you probably need to be asking yourself anyway. So if you're embarking on a project, whether or not you get the funding, you're still going to want to have a handle about what are my costs, what am I trying to do, all the things that the grad application is asking. It's disappointing not to get the grant application, but I feel if you do it well, the process is worthwhile. Another thing I'd add, please, any grant application will have an arts officer. Do talk to that person. Probably before I became an arts officer, I thought applying for a grant was a bit like asking your parents for money, and they were just looking for a reason to say no. Whereas the arts officer, if we've got a grant fund to it, I don't get a bonus at the end of the year if I haven't allocated. If I've got $5,000 to allocate and I only allocate $3,000, the CEO doesn't say, well done, here's $2,000, enjoy your Christmas. Our job is to see that that funding meets the goals, which is generally to go to really good projects. So speak to the arts officer, they're there, and there's nothing worse to be in that room with the assessors, and you know it's a bloody good project. But if only they'd spoken to me, I could have said, add this here, or tidy up your support material.
I would say you could come in with like a clean slate and new idea and work it out through the process. But there is a 4-week window usually for that application. So ensuring you have the appropriate support material might get a little tricky. What a recent bit of feedback was, someone kept referring to they're going to get a mentor, and it was really focused on having a mentor involved, but there was no mentor actually referenced, there was no letter of confirmation. So those sorts of things then make it a little hard to assess because you might have an idea without the detail.
Yes, I would suggest that what you've asked would be best to go, okay, you ring up one of these wonderful arts advice persons and say, okay, blah, 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 I want to do this and do that. And I will turn around and usually say, that's a great idea where you're thinking. You now need to go away for about 3 or 4 months. And in relation to that particular program, you go do the work now. You do the legwork, you do the research, you form the partners, you identify the mentor, you identify the church hall that's going to give it to you for $500 instead of $1,000, and then you do the application in the next round. Contacting the arts officers 2 days before the applications are due are not going to help you get a successful application. And I will usually say, you go away and spend 3 or 4 months, do your work and ring me back. And then I can really help you.
Unless there are any last burning questions. Oh, is that burning? Thank you.
Do grants ever get approved but with a modified grant amount.
And thank you, Lorraine, for coming down from the
We will sometimes, we did it recently, modify the amount, and it was lower than what they had asked for, because their budget line in terms of how they were paying First Nations artists was reviewed by our First Peoples peer review panel, and they didn't feel like that was the appropriate amount of money. So we couldn't support that part of the activity. We did give them that feedback so that next time they would map out more in the budget for that. It's happened a few times with that kind of or where they've not paid artists properly. So we do want to ensure they do, and therefore we don't support that part of the activity.
Generally, it's not something that assessors like doing, particularly if the proposal and budget are realistic. You know, if your budget really aligns to and matches and supports realistically what the scale and scope of what you want to do, it's very unlikely that they're going to say, well, we're only going to fund half of this. What can sometimes work in your favour is to then have like a bit of a plan B proposal. If we weren't to be able to be fully funded, we could deliver this part of the project for this amount.
I was just wondering, are the grants normally offered at the same time each year? So you can, or are they more sliding around?
Both.
I'm going to answer that just for brevity. Just check the websites, but generally there would be a rough consistency, but it could change at any time. So it pays to be, checking regularly all the opportunities you can. May I just thank our terrific panel, generous and thoughtful, Holly, Caitlin, Rohan and Lorraine, and thank you for your excellent questions.